And just as the House of Commons gets back to business, so too do lawyers representing embattled suspended Senator Mike Duffy. Mr. Duffy's lawyer was in court today pushing for a speedy trial for his client, who is facing 31 charges laid against him by the RCMP, and these all related to the Senate expense scandal. Let's bring in our news panel right now. And today we are joined by Elizabeth Thompson. She's with iPolitics. She's in Ottawa. Also joining us today, Wayne Spear. He's a contributor to the Huffington Post and the National Post, and he's in Toronto. So good to see you both. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Elizabeth, I'll ask you first. Here we have a case of, bad timing for the Conservatives, you would think. Just as the campaign for next year's federal election kicks into gear, we have Mike Duffy's trial getting underway. And how much of a problem is this going to be? Is this going to sow a lot of chaos and concern for the Conservatives?
Well, it's potentially a big problem for the Conservatives, depending on what is made public over the course of that court case. And it sounds like after today, that's going to happen a lot sooner than later, because sometimes, as you know, when a case goes before the courts, it can take a very long time before it gets to the point where it's in open court and they're presenting evidence and that. So it'll be very interesting to see what the Crown prosecutors present in terms of evidence, but it may even be more interesting to see what Mike Duffy presents in terms of evidence for his side and who he decides to call to the stand, because to a certain extent it may be people that he believes are necessary to prove his point. Remember this, things like fraud, breach of trust, a lot of it hinges on intent. So, he may call people that talk to the intent, people who talked to the question of whether a lot of other people were under the same impression he was as to how you were supposed to account for things. And it could be interesting to see if he tries to force any sitting members of Parliament, like the Prime Minister, to appear in court. Although there are some 18th century precedents they may be able to latch on to that allow someone who is a sitting member of Parliament to not have to testify within a certain number of days after the sitting ends and after the certain number of days before the sitting is supposed to resume.
Yeah, that's interesting, Elizabeth. But, if you're going to use that and play that card, that in itself, Wayne, could also spill over and have an effect on the campaign as we get closer to that election in a year's time.
Well, the timing of this is no accident. The lawyer, Donald Bain, Mike Duffy's lawyer, is pushing this along. Ordinarily, this wouldn't come into the courts until at least 2016. But if it can come into the courts a year from now, in other words, in September of 2015, in time for the October election, it could be very damaging. And Mike Duffy, even back in his days as a journalist, used to like to say, I know where the bodies are buried in Ottawa, and I know what the scandals are. What we're seeing is the breakdown of a backroom gentleman's agreement, and it's going to get nasty. We know about him that he's vindictive, he's egotistical, he's ambitious, and he's had a 20-year campaign to be in the Senate. It's all crashing down now around him. And he's going to come out and he's going to show us the Mike Duffy that some of us have known for 25 years now.
But will the Prime Minister be asked to testify? I mean, that's a big question. So we're going to be watching, of course, all of this very closely. I want to also talk about the campaign in the mayor's race in the city of Toronto. And Elizabeth, several days now, I think it's day 4, since Doug Ford says he is joining the mayoralty race, stepping in for his ailing brother, who is still in hospital trying to, figure out what's going on with this tumor in his abdomen. But, are you surprised that we haven't heard from Doug Ford? He hasn't formally stepped forward to say, this is who I am, this is what we're going to achieve. Is this calculated, this kind of a move, do you think?
I think when you're facing something like this on the family front, even the best of calculations may not be at the forefront. And, this all has changed very quickly. I don't know exactly who is advising him. And at the moment, they're probably, and rightly so, mostly concerned with finding out what exactly is the problem with Rob Ford. It sounds like from this morning's news clippings that it may be more serious than just something involving the abdomen if they're going, for example, for biopsies in the lungs. And so his attention is probably divided. And it is a tricky time for all politicians when somebody's very sick, because, how do you continue on with an election campaign without making it seem like you're taking advantage of an illness for either to favor you or to hurt the other guy or something like that. And so it's interesting to see how the opponents are playing this, and especially Olivia Chow, who's been through this kind of thing twice, once with herself with thyroid cancer and then with Jack Layton. She is being perhaps the quietest and most discreet of all.
Yeah, it's interesting, Wayne, though. John Tory, who's the other competitor here in this mayor's race, it seems he's now dropping out of debates. So whether this is a change in tactic for him because he doesn't see the point, maybe he's looking ahead to Doug Ford being more of a competitor here and the change in the story there, perhaps taking away some of his support. What do you think of how John Tory has been playing this? Some actually say he was crass when he said, Doug Ford's going to be worse than Rob Ford. Do you think he was? Do you think he could lose support on that?
Well, as for the debates, John Tory is running against Doug Ford now, not Olivia Chow, and it's hard to debate somebody who's already gone on the record saying they're not going to debate. As far as John Tory claiming Doug Ford is going to be worse, there are two camps of people now. There are the people who are going to vote for a Ford no matter what, and they like Doug just as fine. And there are the people who aren't going to vote for a Ford no matter what, and they don't see much difference either. There's a large undecided, and that's the part that's interesting. About 19% of the voters are saying that they're going to make up their mind in some time between now and the election. And Doug is a fellow who doesn't warm up to people. He doesn't have charisma, to put it mildly. So I think this is going to be tough for him, and if he stays out of the light, it may actually help him.
Yeah, Elizabeth, do you think that's how Doug Ford sees it? Does he acknowledge maybe that, less is more in his case?
Well, sooner or later, he's going to have to answer questions, and in the next few days, everyone will have a better idea of how Rob Ford is doing. And before it's troubling to think that somebody could go all the way to Election Day without answering any questions or participating in any debates or giving any interviews. So sooner or later, he'll probably have to come forward and start talking to people. But I think it's understandable, while everything is up in the air with his brother, that perhaps he's not as present on the public stage.
All right, Elizabeth, Wayne, good to talk to you both. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.